Hello and welcome to this installment of Vox Machina. As your narrator, I'll be bringing fantastic works of fiction from the page to your eardrums. Uploads will be posted weekly, so be sure to subscribe and hit the alerts bell to be notified when new installments are available. Got a story you think deserves the Vox Machina treatment? Let me know in a comment and you might just hear it in a future episode. Thanks for listening and on with the show. Every New Beginning by Fencer X. Episode 15. He awoke, as he should have expected, to a stinging jinx. Good, you're awake. Harry opened his eyes, blinking blearily, to find Malfoy stood at the foot of his bed, already dressed and arms crossed over his chest. His fingers were drumming a nervous rhythm against his elbows, and he had taken a very drawn stance, tight and defensive. Harry heaved himself upright slowly, rubbing the heels of his palms in his eyes. "And a very Merry Christmas to you. What time is it?" "Nearly 8. You neglected to rouse on time, so I took the liberty." "The potion said a good 8 hours, not just a good 8 hours," Harry grumbled, though in hindsight he should probably have set an alarm spell so he could be up earlier. Ron had said that lunch would be served at noon, but the implication had been that Harry's presence would be appreciated well before then. Harry was eager to see the Weasleys as well. Arthur and Percy he saw most days of the week, and Ron too, much more often of late, but the others he generally only got to say hello to at the holidays. He hadn't seen Molly in months, back in his own time, as he'd missed his birthday celebration. Would he pop back at the moment he left, he wondered, when he returned? If so, he could probably still make his party. He certainly had time to plan his birthday menu now. He squinted at Malfoy, registering anew that he was, in fact, dressed. "You're already dressed. How long have you been up?" "Since 5. 5? Malfoy shrugged. "On again, off again. Rather fitful. Difficult to get back to sleep with you snoring." "I do not snore, and people in snoring houses certainly shouldn't go around throwing Harry cut himself off. It was Christmas for one, and Malfoy was wrestling with nerves strong enough they'd fought off a healthy dose of dreamless sleep for another. He could let him have his delusions. "Right, I'm getting up." He began to shuffle out of bed, wincing when his feet hit the cold flagstones. There was a beat of awkward silence, and he glanced over at Malfoy, who was still standing at the foot of his bed, twitching nervously. "There hasn't been any word, has there?" "Of course not. How would anyone be able to find us?" He had a point. "Guess we'll have to venture out and ask then, won't we?" "I suppose so," Malfoy said, tone relaxed and flippant and completely at odds with his overall carriage. Taking this as his cue to make himself presentable, Harry cast around for the clothes he'd worn the previous evening, only to find that, in the moment he'd had his back turned, the four-poster had disappeared and replaced itself with a wardrobe full of, presumably, his school clothes. Conveniently standing next to it was a tall, handsome folding screen that Harry was evidently meant to use. He glanced back at Malfoy. "You're doing?" "Hurry and get dressed," Malfoy snapped, clearly in no mood for small talk, and Harry hopped to it. He pulled on what he supposed was the most recent Weasley jumper he'd been gifted, one that, by his recollection, currently hung at the back of his bedroom closet, a bit moth-eaten now after nearly a decade. He would be getting a new one from Molly at the Burrow, as he did every year, but like hell was he showing up for lunch in anything but her handiwork, especially after staying on at Hogwarts instead of joining Ron and his family for the bulk of the holidays. He wondered how Ron had explained his absence. They'd traded a few letters back and forth, Pigwidgeon doing his level best but having to split the job with several of the school owls, but he'd never thought to ask. Once he considered himself presentable, he vanished the folding screen, hoping very much that the room knew to put his wardrobe back where it belonged, and steeled himself with a huff. "Ready for this?" he asked Malfoy, slipping his wand into his pocket. To his surprise, he received not a snippy, superior response along the lines of, "I've been ready since 5, did you not hear me?" but a broken, stuttering exhalation as Malfoy ran a hand through his hair, eyes closed. "No." Harry heard a crack. It was, he realized, the sound of Malfoy's mask starting to chip, smooth porcelain marred by a dark, ruinous run like his own personal lightning bolt scar that only Harry could perceive. Harry saw, through this chink in Malfoy's armour, a flash of something, a glimpse into the future, a future where Malfoy sat, underfed and weak, hunched over in a filthy cell, firing off acidic quips until he mustered the courage to ask Harry if it hurt to die. He didn't like that. No, he didn't like that at all. "Too bad," he said, perhaps rougher than he'd intended, and he clapped Malfoy on the shoulder to steer him towards the door. "Come on, let's go." Malfoy had told Harry not to interfere, so he hadn't, at least not any further than he'd already interfered, and as such, Malfoy had no right to stand here, looking so scared and broken, when once again it was his own damn fault he was in this situation to begin with. Harry hadn't come this far, through fucking space-time itself, and worked this hard to help Malfoy build himself into something society might one day accept, only to have Lucius somehow screw up his son's future yet again. Whatever was going to come would come, and Harry would be here to help Malfoy put himself back together again. And then they'd keep going. Keep practicing and studying and training and brainstorming until they finally got Malfoy's future properly sorted. It was what Harry did, after all. Saved people, even from themselves. They did not rush to the headmistress's office. They walked sedately, and though they did not drag their feet, Harry wouldn't let them, they took their time. Malfoy had seemed to rally at Harry's stern manner, wrestling him from the room, but as they approached the 3rd floor, he began to crumble once more, and Harry thought if he reached out and touched him, he might physically fold in on himself. As addressing his state would only make matters worse, Harry let Malfoy collect himself in silence. It being Christmas morning, the stairwell was quite empty, even with the depleted student population staying on. Right about now, everyone would be down in the Great Hall enjoying a filling breakfast and popping crackers while they waited for owls to bring gifts from friends and family far off. What if McGonagall wasn't even in her office? He wasn't going to send Malfoy into the Great Hall, not when at any moment a delivery owl might drop a Daily Prophet bearing the headline, "Lucius Malfoy murdered overnight," smack into the middle of a rasher of bacon. No, if the headmistress wasn't receiving visitors, they'd find a quiet, empty classroom in which to wait her out. Molly would forgive his being just a little late, surely. Too soon, though, they reached the gargoyle statue guarding the entrance to McGonagall's office, and Harry politely tapped it on its horned cap with his wand. "Harry Potter and Draco Malfoy here to speak with Professor McGonagall, if she's in." "Password?" the gargoyle growled, blinking blearily at them as if it had just awoken. Bugger it. He thought her office might be open to all comers during the holidays, but then it was Christmas morning. She probably didn't want to be disturbed. What had the phrase been before? He racked his brain, casting back 3 months, then lit up. "Argyle socks." "Not even close." Fuck. But he was not above pleading his case. "Please, we really need to speak with her. It's important, and it won't take very long. Have a bit of Christmas spirit, won't you?" The gargoyle raked the both of them with a menacing look, sneering, "What's your business?" Conscious of Malfoy's delicate constitution just now, Harry diplomatically said, "Personal." The gargoyle regarded them for a long moment, and then, either satisfied with the answer or eager to get back to the nap from which it had been roused, it shifted out of the way to reveal the spiral staircase leading up to the headmistress's tower. Harry presumed this meant McGonagall was indeed in her office, and he glanced back at Malfoy. "You want to go up first, or shall I?" "Think it fucking matters," Malfoy muttered, a bit lost and weak, and while Harry had meant the offer to be a courteous one, it was clear from Malfoy's tone he thought it a challenge to his courage. "Well, she likes me. Or she had, once upon a time. At least if I'm first up, she'll be in a good mood, and maybe more delicate with the delivery if there's any bad news to share." Malfoy gave a non-committal grunt, and Harry took this as the signal to begin the ascent. Up they climbed, wending their way around the tower until they reached the sturdy jamb fronting the headmistress's office. McGonagall was at her desk, already in full robes and head bowed as her quill scritched furiously over a piece of parchment. Just on the wall behind her hung Dumbledore's portrait, and he winked at Harry from beneath his cheerfully festooned Santa hat. First the ever-flowing eggnog, and now this. How on earth did portraits come by these sorts of things? Harry rapped softly on the wood, and McGonagall's steely gaze flickered up once from her parchment, and then back down again. "Happy Christmas, Potter. Off to visit Mr. Weasley and his family, then?" Yes, headmistress, shortly, but first, we..." He quickly stepped clear of the doorway, revealing Malfoy, who glanced at Harry in panic before he promptly schooled his features into something resembling constipation. "We were wondering—" "We?" McGonagall raised her head wholly this time, brows knitting before flying up into her wispy hair. "Good gracious, Mr. Malfoy!" Well, it wasn't the happy Christmas Harry had received, but it was a start. "What on earth are you, the both of you, doing here?" And before Harry could explain the situation, her tone took a quick, sharp turn into suspicious. "So help me if I have to deal with any tomfoolery from you two on Christmas Day. It's not, headmistress, tomfoolery or anything like that, promise." He could feel Malfoy edging closer to the door and was confident he was already mentally beating a hasty retreat back to the room, because he never had to deal with his father's death if no one ever told him about it, right? Schrodinger's Malfoy, or something like that. "We were only wondering if—" "Is he dead?" Malfoy spat, nerves jangling his voice, and he seemed stricken he'd even spoke, looking like he very much wanted to claw the words back into his throat. McGonagall straightened immediately, struggling to her feet from beneath what looked to be several warm knitted blankets draped over her lap. She fumbled with a heavy shawl about her shoulders. "Is who dead? My word, what's gotten into you two?" She frowned. "You weren't at breakfast, either of you. Where have you been?" Malfoy had a bad dream." Malfoy pinched him sharply in the side, angled so that McGonagall couldn't see, but Harry soldiered on. It was a reasonable explanation, even if it did make Malfoy sound a bit loony. "One of those ones that feels so real you could swear it was, and now he's worried something might have happened to his father. So have you received any word or anything about Lucius Malfoy?" "And Mr. Malfoy discusses his dreams with you, Mr. Potter?" McGonagall was looking at him like she might have thought he'd gone round the twist, her gaze darting back and forth between him and Malfoy, and he had the distinct stomach-churning sensation she was drawing all sorts of inappropriate inferences as to how Harry might have learned about Malfoy's sleeping habits. He let her think what she would, though. They had bigger fish to fry. "Please, Professor, have you heard anything? From Minister Shacklebolt or Head Auror Robards, the Prophet, even, perhaps looking for a quote?" "Of course not. It's Christmas morning, Potter. I imagine the minister is having a nice lie-in." "I'm sure he would be, but he might be up if there were an accident at Azkaban involving a prisoner." McGonagall was giving him a very shrewd look now. "You haven't been using my flu without asking, have you, Mr. Potter?" "What? No, honestly." "No," she said with finality. "I've received no owls, no flu calls, nothing of the sort to indicate that Mr. Malfoy's father has met with any manner of mischief." She shifted her gaze to Malfoy now, softening a bit. "It was but a dream, Mr. Malfoy. Run down to the Great Hall and get some breakfast in you, and then perhaps pop by the hospital wing to see if Madame Pomfrey can find something to settle your nerves, Malfoy ducked his head, releasing a haggard breath, and seemed to lean into the jam, suddenly boneless. "Yes, headmistress." She nodded, then turned back to Harry, clucking her tongue. "I hope you haven't been putting ideas into Mr. Malfoy's head, Mr. Potter." "What?" Harry blanched. "Oh, God, no, I swear." But of course McGonagall knew well he'd commandeered her flu for a private audience with Kingsley, so he couldn't exactly blame her for jumping to what must have seemed like an awfully convenient conclusion. "I swear, I haven't. I only thought to help." "Is that all, gentlemen?" She sighed, settling back into her chair. She gestured to the parchment covering her desk. "The first year's Term 1 essays need seeing to, unless you're still feeling a helpful urge, Mr. Potter." And that was their cue to make themselves scarce. I better get myself ready to visit the burrow, if that's all right, headmistress. And I've asked Aberforth down at the Hogshead if I might use his flu, so I won't need to disturb you." "A Christmas miracle," McGonagall muttered dryly, shooing them out and reaching for her quill again. "Happy Christmas, Mr. Potter, Mr. Malfoy." "You too, Professor," Harry offered weakly, trying not to look like he was scurrying for the staircase when he was, in fact, doing just that. How had he walked in here to help Malfoy and wound up nearly getting an earful himself? The things he did for Malfoy? He straightened just as they'd gone down a few steps, McGonagall's doorway now out of sight, to find Malfoy hanging back, leaned up against the wall for support. He looked pale, paler than usual, the torches and the sconces throwing bouncing shadows across his sharp features. "Oi, you all right?" Malfoy nodded mutely, stumbling down another few steps until he'd passed Harry. Harry followed, wand out, and a levitation charm on his lips in case Malfoy took a tumble. It had been good what McGonagall had said, hadn't it? She hadn't received word of anything, and surely if Lucius Malfoy had died, Malfoy would have been the first to be notified, right? Him and his mum? Kingsley was a good sort. He wouldn't keep it from Malfoy. God, what if they thought there'd been funny business involved? Well, there had been, of course. Lucius had been murdered, after all. But what if they thought Malfoy had something to do with it? Or, fuck, Harry. After all the hullabaloo about placing Lucius in solitary and then moving him back out again because, as Harry had put it, he'd been pretty sure he'd simply misread the tea leaves in his morning cuppa. God, Kingsley was never going to trust his intuition again after that. He had to be on several watch lists. But no, if that were the case, then he and Malfoy certainly wouldn't be wandering around free as birds, would they? Harry was starting to accept that perhaps he wasn't the crack aura he thought himself to be, but Robards was the real deal. He'd have Harry or Malfoy or both of them in oral custody with a vial of Veritaserum ready to go. The Ministry, even 7 years hence, took their Death Eater inquisitions quite seriously, and Hogwarts students or no, Saviour of the Wizarding World or no, they'd be right on top of things if there were the slightest hint of malfeasance. Lucius Malfoy wasn't dead. He was alive. It was Christmas morning, 1998, and Malfoy's dad was still alive. Malfoy went down, just crumpled into a heap, and Harry raised his wand, until Malfoy started laughing. Laughing! Giggling, really, but genuinely giddy, showing a wide mouth full of bright white teeth. He let his head fall back against the rough stone sitting there on the bottommost step and looked up at Harry, still several steps above him. Why do I want to cry? He wasn't crying, not yet at least. His eyes were glassy, though, and red-rimmed, and he was breathing through his mouth in short, sharp bursts, but still grinning almost maniacally. Harry stumbled in his speech. I don't know. It's just a thing. Sometimes your body just needs a release. I'd rather pull one off then. Fuck, I don't want to cry. He squinted his eyes shut, and Harry thought to remind him he shouldn't do that if he didn't want to start a jag, because that would only stimulate the reflex, but he held his tongue. He kind of wanted to see Malfoy happy cry, just a little bit. It'd be like watching a car crash in real time. I fucking hate crying. Wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. I mean, I've already seen you do it the once. Malfoy actually laughed again, more open-mouthed, but still a bit wobbly. Shit, don't do that, you'll set me off. He rubbed the heels of his palms into his eyes. He practiced a few slow, even breaths, looking in his position a bit like a pregnant woman in birthing class. What are the chances he was never in any danger to begin with? What? Maybe you really have hit your head and imagined this time-slipping business. What are the chances, do you think? Harry paused and then was forced to admit, not insignificant, I suppose. All things considered, didn't it sound more plausible? That he simply got knocked for a loop in charms or defense and dreamed up his entire life for the next 7 years? But we've come this far already. What will it hurt to see it through to the end? The end? To, you getting your future sorted. Set to where there's no chance you'll somehow wind up under a nefarious thumb. Again? Again. What will it hurt? Depends on your definition of pain, Malfoy muttered to himself, letting his hands fall away. The skin around his eyes glistened with moisture, but he looked to have brought his breathing under control. He struggled to unsteady feet, and Harry fought to keep his hands by his side. Malfoy was being vulnerable enough as it was. He certainly wouldn't appreciate that proffered hand of Harry's now. Suppose you need to finish preparing for your lunch at the Warren, then. Harry started, then caught himself at the crooked little grin Malfoy was wearing. He was in, shockingly, a good mood. Harry had expected relief. He hadn't expected whatever this was. Not a crack like he'd seen earlier, but a layer of his mask peeling off. That Harry welcomed happily. What will you do? I don't expect I'll flew back until tomorrow. Sure you'll have finished shaking all those grimy Weasley hands by then? Malfoy asked, one brow raised, though he didn't seem to expect a response, continuing on with a dramatic sigh. I hadn't really thought of it. Been a bit... He hesitated, preoccupied. He gave a shrug. I suppose I could write to Mother, wish her a happy Christmas. Harry almost didn't ask, wary he was stepping in it, but in the end he did, because he was Harry Potter. Is she abroad then, your mum? I wondered why you weren't staying with her for the holidays. And, well, I recall she moved to France after your dad passed, but that hasn't happened now, so... To his great shock, Malfoy didn't pounce on him immediately with a curt, "It's none of your fucking business." Instead, he seemed to hedge, and Harry could almost see him visibly warring with himself, like he wanted to open it up, but knew he'd regret it. He finally said, in a tone that suggested he did not agree with the matter, "She thought I'd be safer here, that if I left the castle grounds or strayed beyond perhaps Hogsmeade, I'd be vulnerable to acts of retribution." From the public? Them, Death Eaters at large, that hippogriff that tried to maul me in third year, take your pick. Malfoy wasn't meant to know that Buckbeak had escaped the Ministry executioner's axe. Buckbeak was put down. Was he now? Then which one was it I saw featured in an article in Lovegood's Rag not 3 weeks into fourth year? I'd recognise the markings of the beast that nearly felled me anywhere. Harry boggled. You read the Quibbler? Of course not. I used it to line Gladiolus's cage. Caught a glimpse when I vanished his pellets once. He smoothed down his rumpled robes. She's always been overprotective of me, as if there aren't students and probably even staff here who wouldn't rejoice to see me take a jinx to the face or an untimely tumble down the stairs. He raked Harry with a cool look, yourself included. I believe I have already advised you in no uncertain terms to watch your step on the stairs, so I take offence to the insinuation. Malfoy rolled his eyes. And she's not being overprotective. If someone can get at your dad while themselves incarcerated at Azkaban in my time, I think she had good reason to suspect you might face similar threats outside of Hogwarts. Well, did I? Malfoy challenged. After I graduated? I don't know, Harry said, seeing as you fucked off to the continent shortly thereafter, and the Neo-Death Eaters got their hooks into you eventually. They might not have cursed you outright, but they were as much responsible for your untimely demise as the Dementor. Malfoy shrank in on himself a bit, and Harry regretted his frankness. They always spoke about Malfoy's death in the abstract, rarely so directly, so luridly. It doesn't make her mothering any more bearable. Well, given she's your mother, I reckon she's entitled to a bit of mothering. However necessary or not, you may deem it. Doesn't mean I have to like it. Heavens forfend you not make known to all and sundry your displeasure with mothering or hovering or coddling. Harry stepped back out into the hallway from around the gargoyle statue, giving it a little salute of gratitude as it rumbled back into place once Malfoy had joined him. Back in the bright hallway, tall glazed windows letting the bright morning light of a sunny Christmas day filter into the castle, he could still detect a bit of puffiness about Malfoy's eyes, but the mask was more or less firmly back into place. So, your plans? Malfoy sighed, scrubbing at his hair in a calculated manner that made it ruffle roguishly. Yes, I think I will write to her. I haven't done since you meddled, and I expect if I don't do so before the new year, I'll receive a howler. Purebloods and howlers? Purebloods invented howlers, Potter, only they were called obsceniques and involved restrained but scathing excoriations of the parties targeted. They only became vessels of strident braying once they fell into the hands of those lacking the adequate vocabulary to sufficiently vent their displeasure. Pretty sure only half those words you just used actually exist. Says someone liable to send a howler over an obscenique. He crossed his arms and thought, perhaps I'll write to father as well. He turned to Harry. They do allow the prisoners' letters, don't they? Harry nodded. It'll be picked over by Aurors and such before it's handed off, but yes, they do. I'm sure he'd be pleased to know you were thinking of him. Malfoy wrinkled his nose, and Harry got the sense his attempt at encouragement had been unappreciated. Harry decided not to do it again. It felt odd wishing well to someone who'd tried to kill him, directly or otherwise, on multiple occasions. Well, Malfoy said, with a huff of finality, I suppose I'll go see if there's any breakfast to be had. He raked Harry with a look. And you ought to make yourself presentable before your Christmas bruncheon. Your hair looks like shit. Harry patted at his hair, frowning. It looks the same as it always does. My point, exactly. Harry showed him a finger. Tell your dad I said hi. He'll have a stroke, Malfoy said. He's only just survived past the day he was meant to die, and now you want to kill him again. Hey, one good turn deserves another. He smiled to show he was mostly speaking in jest. Mostly. Go have breakfast, and watch for owls bearing good tidings. Bearing what? Harry set off for the stairwell with a backwards wave, leaving Malfoy to mull over this fresh mystery all on his own.